Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Monterey County April Lunch and Learn meeting. I'm Beverly Bean, president for one more month. It's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker and member of this league, Amy White. Amy is director of LandWatch, Monterey County, and joined LandWatch in 2009 after working as campaign coordinator for Supervisor Jane Parker. She also serves as vice president of the Planning and Conservation League. She is passionate about the economic and environmental health of Monterey County and believes that good decisions about land are the most direct way to ensure the health of the county. Amy has an MS in public policy from the Panetta Institute and a BA in history and political science. Will you join me in giving Amy a warm welcome?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the League of Women Voters. I've been a member for years, and I meant what I said on the LandWatch website when we sent out an email about this, that the League of Women Voters really holds some great, relevant discussions on issues that are super important to Monterey County. So I just feel honored that I've been asked to speak today. I see a lot of members in the room. Thank you all for being members and maybe some potential members. LandWatch is a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded in 1997 by a group of people who really were worried about, to put it simply, Monterey County turning into San Jose. Monterey County has valuable farmland, amazingly valuable farmland in the Salinas Valley where I live in Gonzales, and a really beautiful coastline and lots of natural resources. And if we're not careful and develop in a way that values those natural resources, then we're gonna get in trouble. And so the founders of LandWatch really felt like the way to get at that was through policy efforts. We are really a land use policy organization. We're not an environmental organization, although I like to say that the environment does benefit from the things that we advocate from. We are really a policy organization, and I feel very thrilled personally that I get to use my master's in public policy in this job. I know a lot of the folks that I went to graduate school with aren't as lucky. They're not actually doing policy work, and so I just feel very blessed. We have a board of 9 people, 9 awesome volunteers. We have a board member here today, Janet Brennan. You guys all know Janet Brennan. She, in addition to being a board member, does a lot, I'd venture to say most of our technical work, like reviewing environmental impact reports and making policy decisions, not only as a board member, but with her expertise as a planner. We have a full-time staff of 2, me, and we have an office manager named Chris Flesher, who, if you ever call, you'll probably get him on the phone before you get me on the phone. He's been there longer than me. He's great. He worked under Chris Fitz, the executive director before me, Chris is also president of the board right now. We have about 500 member households. I say member households because really we have a lot more members than 500, because most of the households have more than one person in it, that like Howard, for instance. Howard and his wife are members. So 500 members and households, and I also like to say that that's more, or let's see, it's more members than the Salinas Valley Chamber. It's a little bit less members than the Monterey Peninsula Chamber. So LandWatch is really an institution in this county that is important, and when we get involved in an issue, elected officials listen, because we have a powerful membership base behind us that makes us effective. So, as I said before, we were founded with the vision to create sound, responsible policies that guide the decisions about our land. What LandWatch, what I've seen, and I'm sure the executive directors before me could agree, is there seems to be a disconnect sometimes between what the general public wants and what the elected officials decide to do. And LandWatch really feels like we can play a role in getting the elected officials to hear the public's viewpoint, because that's difficult. I mean, people work hard, especially in this county. This is a very hardworking county. And how does an individual get the attention of the decision makers. Well, LandWatch, we really get to bridge that on the issues that we care about, and that's a role we take very seriously. I like this slide because it sort of gives an overview of how we do the work that we do. Land use policy being totally important with how the environmental health, the economic health, and social equity of the county is maintained. This first picture is a picture of some hikes that I led through the Fort Ord National Monument last year, which would allow people to see a view of the proposed Farini Ranch development, which I'm going to talk about later. So that picture really shows one way that we get the public educated on what the elected officials are considering. This other thing is one of our letters that we send out. So when I talked earlier about Janet Brennan doing a lot of the technical work for LandWatch, so as many of you know, when big projects are proposed, there has to be an environmental impact report, essentially an assessment of the potential impacts that that project will have on a community. And so Janet, and sometimes with the help of our attorney John Farrow, will look at these environmental documents and really assess, are the impacts being assessed the way they should? Is the document saying what it's supposed to say? Was anything forgotten? And so that's sort of the technical work that we do, and those letters will then be used as part of outreach to the community. Essentially it informs how we engage in projects. Like today, I give lots of speeches all over the community. On Monday, I had the great benefit of speaking to a big class of 5th graders, which was a little different than my talk today, but the Monterey International School invited me to come to speak to all the 5th graders about desalination, and those 5th graders were smart. I was kind of like prepared to really, not dumb it down, but just like bring it down to their level, and they had really complex questions. They all wanted to know about Measure O too, which I found it was very interesting. So yeah, that's part of the public outreach. We also have a great website. I'm really proud of our website. It's one thing that, when I came on board, being, the youngest executive director that LandWatch has ever had, while I'm not as tech savvy as some people my age, I really saw a missed opportunity with the website, and so I totally revamped it. We've got links to EIRs, links to all of our letters. I'm really, really proud of that website. So if you ever are browsing, actually, I think you can search in Google land Monterey County, and our website might be the first one that comes up. Our website's enormous. It's not hard to maneuver, but we've had a website since we were founded in 1997. And so our webmaster, our volunteer webmaster, who's a really nice guy named Jeff, he also does the aquarium's website, and he just loves LandWatch so much he volunteers his time to do our website. He says, wow, I don't work with many websites that have 16,000 pages. And it's not superfluous information. It's all, it is great. I mean, that's how the 5th grade class contacted me, is they were looking for information about desal, and they found one of Janet Brennan's white papers on desal, and they read it, and it was informative, and anyway, I'm very, very proud of that website. So take a look at it. It's landwatch.org, not landwatch.com. Landwatch.com sells land. So even today, I'll make the excuse or make the mistake and type in .com, and I'm just like, and it's funny because their logo looks a lot like ours, and we have a trademarked logo. So I've thought about dealing with getting them to change their logo because we were founded before them. Anyway, but .org, not .com. Another thing that we do, and you'll see more of it later, one of our board members, Jared Ikeda, he's a retired planner, a really nice guy. Some of you might know him. He worked for the county for years and other institutions. He is an expert on GIS and doing overlays of projects. I know Bev was really interested in me bringing some of the maps, which you'll see later. And so Jared can take the information from an environmental document and create an overlay, this is what the project is going to look like. This is where the lot lines will go. This is where the roads will go. And he can overlay it on Google Earth Maps. And it's really helpful to be able to see exactly what we're talking about. And then also we do, and I'm sure many of you get it, our emails to members, which is, we announced this talk today. Some of our priorities for 2014 for Rini Ranch, which I know you want to hear about today, the 2010 general plan, 2010, that was a while ago. They're still trying to implement it, and it's moving really slowly. And LandWatch is working very hard. We actually have a partner in the work, the Carmel Valley Association has partnered with us, and we're really thrilled about it. I'm working with MIBS on that. And they're not only financially helping us because it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to implement the general plan, but they're also just helping us stay on top of it. So we really appreciate CVA's help. And what does that mean to implement a general plan? That sounds kind of wonky. So the general plan, every county, every city in the state of California, and I have a CEQA attorney in here, so correct me, Richard, if I say anything wrong. Every county and city has to have a general plan, which is essentially a constitution for how land is going to be developed, traffic circulation, biological resources, water resources, all the things in a county that need to be paid attention to. Essentially, the general plan will lay out where development should go, hopefully where development shouldn't go. And it's a really important document. We actually have a book, and I brought some extra copies if anyone wants one. It's called Land Use and the General Plan. Gary Patton wrote this book when he was the executive director of LandWatch with help from a grant. This is also on our website. I think I brought 15 copies, but you can look on it on our website, or you can ask me for a copy and I'll mail you one. And it's a great book because it just lays out what a general plan is, what are good policies in a general plan, what you want to have in a really good general plan. So Monterey County adopted a new one in 2010. They were operating on a 1982 general plan, really, really old, outdated general plan. And Gary Patton and then Chris Fitz fought really hard to have an updated general plan with some good policies. There's some good policies. There's some not so good policies, but we definitely fought hard to get some good policies. One good one that we're pretty proud of that LandWatch pushed hard for, this is maybe important to Billy from the Farm Bureau, we have language in the general plan that prohibits subdivision of prime and important ag land for non-agricultural purposes. So that's important. In the Salinas Valley, there weren't any of those prohibitions, and prime and important is just different statuses of like the state of California will map prime and important ag lands, prime being the best ag land, important being the next best. And so LandWatch fought really hard for that policy, and we got it. Another policy that we fought really hard for is no more subdivision in Carmel Valley beyond a certain amount of lots that they agreed to, but no more big subdivision in Carmel Valley. That was also a policy we fought real hard for. So of course another thing that we're working on in 2014 and probably beyond is Fort Ord. This is just a general, what if we didn't do the work that we do? LandWatch is really unique in Monterey County. There's no other organization that has paid staff that is totally focused on land use policy. We're the only ones, and we're really proud of that. Sometimes I would like to have another one to sort of relieve some of the pressure off us. That would be great, but we're really proud of that. It's very unique what we do. We follow land developments, we follow policy actions, we keep pressure on the county when they're doing the wrong thing. No one else does that in the county, and so it's really unique. And if we didn't do it, increased traffic, reduced water supply, loss of recreational access, more sprawling developments, loss of habitat and wildlife, and a lack of review and information. When I was talking earlier about environmental documents that are released, and we painstakingly review them, Janet and sometimes our attorney painstakingly reviews these documents that are sometimes that thick. If anyone's seen an EIR, it's an unbelievable amount of information. Well, oftentimes, developers, when they propose a big project, they think of an EIR as just a checkbox, like done, I finished that, it's over. But what an EIR really is it assesses those impacts and it allows the public, it allows LandWatch to participate in the process. I'm from Louisiana, and I'm sure many of you have heard me say this before. We don't have that in Louisiana. You know, like something's proposed, they build it. You know, I mean, there's no communication, conversation with the community. There's no rules. I have a dear friend from high school who's a big property developer down in Louisiana. And when I go down there and visit, he thinks it's like crazy the way we do it. He's like, you have to talk to people about building something? Like, really? You know, I mean, they buy a piece of land and they build it if it makes no sense. If you've ever been to Louisiana, especially Baton Rouge where I grew up, you can't go from one side of the town to the other without sitting in traffic for 2 hours. I mean, there's just like no sense in planning or any thought to what makes a good community, like what makes sense. And so I think it's really neat that California, you know, says, hey, when big developments are proposed, we need to look at the impacts, we need to check in with the community. That's amazing. And that's, you know, one of those things that LandWatch does. We look at that information and we say, is this project a good idea or is it not? So I want to give a few facts, and if you were at our November lunch, you've probably already heard these, so I'll be brief. And this is important because to me it should really guide how our elected officials make decisions. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So in Monterey County, and we're lucky that Janet keeps track of this for LandWatch, there are over 10,000 homes that have been approved that aren't yet built. Over 10,000 homes that have been approved and haven't been built yet. And these projects have been approved for years, some of them. And they approve them and they just sit there. And so when I hear like, oh, we need economic development in Monterey County, I'm like, well, build what you've approved. You know, like build the shopping centers that you've approved, build the houses that you've approved. There's millions of square feet of retail space, commercial space that's already approved. And it hasn't been built yet. So, you know, LandWatch really feels like, hey, before you start considering new massive developments, let's be sure that we take into account what's already been approved. That's very important. And unfortunately, sometimes our elected officials don't think about that. And so it's LandWatch that goes and reminds them, like, don't forget, you know, you've got this development right here that hasn't been built yet, so be careful. And a lot of that development's out in Fort Ord. I recently sat down with a candidate for District 2 supervisor, and this candidate said to me, I'm not going to say he or her, so you won't know who I'm talking about. This candidate said to me, well, we need economic development out at Fort Ord. And like, I said, you know, gee, we've got about 4,000 houses, we've got millions of square feet of commercial and retail, you know, because we were talking about Measure M. I said, you know, go build that, like build it. It's ready to be built, you know. And this candidate had no idea that stuff had been approved and unconstructed out there. This person had no, excuse me, I was really trying. This candidate had no idea that stuff had been approved already out there, and that worried me a lot. And so, you know, I also took that as a sign that, like, we're not screaming loud enough. Like, LandWatch really needs to get our message out there even more. Another piece of information I want to give you before I move on to Farini Ranch, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, average per capita income in Monterey County is $25,000. The median household income is $60,000. 20% of county residents, 20%, 1/5, live below the poverty line. So this is a big deal. When you look at those numbers, what those numbers say to me is some of the stuff that's being proposed doesn't make any sense. So I live in Gonzales, I've said that before, in the Salinas Valley. There is a desperate need for multifamily housing. And I'm careful not to say affordable housing. We just really, really need multifamily housing. Maybe it needs to be affordable, I don't know. I haven't necessarily done that assessment. But like a dire, dire need for apartments and multifamily housing. My fiance, who's a farmer, they employ a lot of workers and they pay them pretty well, but they're not going to be buying a house at Freeney Ranch. They're not going to be buying, a house at Monterey Downs. They're not going to be buying one of the homes that have been approved and unconstructed. There hasn't been enough built to service the people that pick our vegetables, that clean the hotel rooms. That is where the need is, and it's a pretty desperate need. One of the projects that LandWatch is working on right now is the Pebble Beach Affordable Housing Project. Now the EIR is going to come out and we're going to assess it and see, but LandWatch worked really hard with the Pebble Beach company to not just let them pay an in lieu fee to the county that would then turn into county administrators' pay, but build the units themselves. Because oftentimes what happens with affordable housing, because in policy there's a mandate that if you build a new large development, you have to build some affordable housing for county residents. Well, a lot of times these developers will just pay a fee. And at the hearing, at the Pebble Beach hearing, the county had to admit, because LandWatch was pushing them hard, the county had to admit that, sometimes those in lieu fees, nothing gets built. That it just goes to pay county administrators or it goes to support the program of affordable housing. I mean, so anyway, we fought hard to get some language in that approval that said Pebble Beach had to build it themselves, or if they paid the in lieu fee, the in lieu fee could only be used for the actual construction of units on the peninsula. Not in Chular, not in Greenfield, not in Salinas, but on the peninsula. When I talked to this 5th grade class, I was teaching them about like hospitality workers and the different, constituents that are involved in, who the desal is going to affect. And about 1/3 of the class said, oh, my parents work in hospitality, when they realized it wasn't a hospital. I was talking about hospitality. They didn't know that word. And they said, oh, my parents work in hospitality. And I said, well, where do you live? Salinas Valley. That's where they live, the Salinas Valley. And so it created a nice opportunity for me to explain jobs housing imbalance. I said, how much time do your parents spend on Highway 68, going to and from work? That time, that opportunity cost of sitting in the car takes time away from them caring for their children or working in a garden or whatever, they're just sitting in a car because all the affordable housing is in the Salinas Valley for the most part. But the hospitality workers are on the peninsula. And so LandWatch worked really hard with Pebble Beach. Like, you've got to build those units on the peninsula. Anyway, that was kind of a long story to talk about this median household income and incomes in Monterey County in general. But it's one of the things that we think about when new projects come forward. We look at that EIR, we look at the impacts, but then we also say, what's really needed in this county? Is another 212 multi-million-dollar homes on the hillside, is that what we need? Is that what we need? Is that going to help our community? Okay, so now let's get to those 212 houses. I threw this in here just because I thought it was interesting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. So it's another project we're working on. We haven't taken a position on it, but it's called Paraiso Hot Springs. It's down outside of Greenfield and Soledad out in the mountains, and it used to be an old historic hot springs area. You may have gone to it when you were a child. It's really neat. And the developer's proposing essentially a kind of a new city out there. And I've gone out there and I've spoken to an overflowing room of farmers that are around there and just residents that are really concerned that this one-lane road that has no ability to be widened because it's like on the side of a cliff is going to service 3 hotels and restaurants and a spa and this and that. And so anyway, it's just one of those projects. The EIR came out last year and Janet and John worked pretty hard on it. We got some support from the landowners around there, some financial support to really do a good job looking at that EIR. I don't know what's going to become of it. I guess they're recirculating parts of the EIR, but it's just something that we're working on. It didn't get a lot of news, so I thought it would be interesting to tell you about it, but it's a Salinas Valley project. So this is Freeney Ranch. I will say the developer is here today. He comes to all my talks and walks, and so hi Ray, how are you? I'm always honored when you show up. just to orient you a little bit, and maybe you're already oriented, but I'll tell you. So that's San Venancio Road, that road that's going that way. That's Highway 68. That's Toro Park over here, the existing neighborhood of Toro Park. So a disclaimer, the project has changed, been altered, lot lines, they're going to do this now and that and move this here and move that there. So this may not be exactly accurate, but these lines, these lot lines and the roads were taken from the EIR that was released in November 2012. I know when I was on a hike with the developer, he was saying, no, we're going to do things different now. And I said, well, when it's in black and white on paper, when it's on paper, then I will change our maps. But right now, what's on paper is that right there. What you're looking at is essentially the 212 homes. This is what's called the western portion of the project. So let me give you some project facts. 212 homes on lots ranging from 1/2 acre to 5 acres. The land's current use is active grazing land. Scott Violini has the lease on the land. He runs cattle out there. And just again for reference, this area right here is what's known as the lupin field, the pretty lupin field. So I guess the original proposal back in the 70s, that was going to be filled with houses. People said, that wasn't going to work. And they sort of moved the houses out of the lupin field, but as far as I can tell, it's still quite a bit of houses in the lupin field. If you're looking at 1/2 acre to 5 acre lots along there and then a road, the county is relying on the 1982 general plan to assess this project. And so you might say, well, that's weird. Why is that? Well, the county had this funny rule that when they were doing the general plan update, they said, well, if a project application was complete before 2007, they can use the old rules. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of projects that had complete applications before 2007. And so what LandWatch refers to them as pipeline projects. They were already in the pipeline. And so unfortunately, this is one of those projects that is not going to have to adhere to some of the new good policies in the new general plan. If built, what is currently proposed, there will be another traffic light on Highway 68 right here. That has definitely caused a lot of concern. There might be a private road through Toro Regional Park, although that received so much pushback from the community. I can't imagine that the Board of Supervisors would give away even a little bit of Toro Regional Park to a private developer. It doesn't make any sense. The project also relies, and this is something, and again, this is a little technical, so just bear with me, but it's important. The project relies on roadway improvements that are not actually adopted, funded, or planned for. So what we'll see a lot, Janet always finds this, she's really good at this. She'll go into an EIR and they'll say, oh, the project won't have significant traffic impacts because this and this and this and this are going to happen. And then Janet goes to the TAMC website and she looks and sees, are any of those projects listed? Are they planned for? Are they funded? And in the case of this project, a lot of those roadway improvements are, maybe ideas, but they're not planned for and they're not funded. And so what LandWatch says is we say, hey, how is that fair to build a development, create all these impacts on the community? And it's not just the community. My mom commutes every morning on Highway 68. She's a teacher in Salinas and she lives in Seaside. She commutes on that road. It's not just the people in Toro, the people in San Venancio. These are the commuters. These are people who are working. These are tourists. These are huge impacts. How is it fair to build a project and say, oh, but it's good because these roadway improvements are going to happen in 100 years? That's just not fair. So that's one of the things that it's not fair, and frankly, it's not legal under CEQA. So that we've got that on our side. The project would also destroy biological resources, including cutting down 14 acres of oak woodland and building on top of a well-established wildlife corridor. One of the cool things about this process has been There's other nonprofits in the area. I want to be careful. Anyway, there's another nonprofit in Monterey County that is very concerned about this because of the wildlife, the movement corridors, and that's very helpful for us. So it's not just LandWatch and our members and the neighbors that are upset. There's actually really big impacts to movement corridors. So, you know, having commuted on Highway 68 for years, I always noticed, you know, as we say in the South, roadkill, dead wildlife in this stretch. Well, it's because it's a well-used, well-documented wildlife corridor. So the neat thing is they expanded the San Venancio Bridge and did some work at that intersection, and so for the most part, wildlife can go underneath that bridge. But wildlife also travels right up through here to go into Toro Regional Park and then down to Toro Creek. And then there's another corridor further down. I mean, this is a well-established animal corridor. And so luckily there's been other groups that have been concerned. The other concern is there's another project called Harper Canyon in Encina Hills. For those of you who live out there, Sylvia may have heard of it. There's another project being proposed right up the road from here. And so, you know, I'll have to get Jared to add those GIS lines, because when you look at those two projects together, the impacts to the animal corridor and, you know, water, everything would just be huge. It's not just this one. There's this other big project being proposed as well. It's not as big as this. I think Harper Canyon and Encina Hills is 17 additional lots. There's already 14, but they're looking at 17 more. But it's big in land area. Finally, water, right? So water, where's the water going to come from? That's what everyone wants to know. So I sat in a 5-hour hearing yesterday about water. There's, you know, we're in a drought. The reservoirs are practically empty. The farmers aren't that concerned this year, but next year, if those reservoirs stay empty, oh my. I mean, we're in big trouble. I mean, the farmers have gone into the groundwater and really pumped that groundwater more. You know, there's no releases from the reservoirs right now, so that aquifer is not being replenished. The rubber dam at the end of it has not been functioning at all this year. There have been no diversions down there because there's no water. So the question is, where's the water going to come from? So this project is relying on the Salinas Valley Water Project. I'm not going to get too technical on this. The Salinas Valley Water Project was approved a while ago. But the Salinas Valley Water Project anticipated the assumptions for that study. You know, those of you who are science-minded, the assumptions for that study are wrong. LandWatch has pointed out for years that they're wrong. They said, oh, farmland's going to decrease in the Salinas Valley. It's wildly increased. There's a lot of assumptions that went into that study that aren't correct. So using that study as a way to say, oh, we're good, we have water, is really problematic, because the study in and of itself is incorrect. And just another view. So this is the view above Toro Cafe. You're looking at Toro Cafe there. And by the way, I have copies of our comment letter. We submitted 2 comment letters on them. They're kind of big and very complicated. Janet and John are very smart, and so they're big and complicated. They're also on our website if you want to look at it. But our second comment letter, I do want to point out. So we did our main comment letter, and then I was out trail running, because I go out to the Fort Ord National Monument all the time, and I was out trail running, and I said, oh man, the EIR didn't even identify that land is a Fort Ord National Monument. And the EIR came out after it became a national monument. So I said, huh. And so I actually had the EIR in my car. And so I went and I looked and I called John Farrow and I said, they didn't identify this as a national monument. That's an impact. Because, you know, they built that new beautiful parking lot on Highway 68. They're encouraging more users, and that parking lot is always full, by the way. You know, major uses to the national monument, and they did not assess the viewshed impacts. Now, you know, to some people that might be like, well, viewshed, you know, doesn't matter, but it's important. It's an impact that they didn't assess. And so when I took folks on the hikes out there to view the property, I know, you know, the developer had said, well, you won't be able to see these from Highway 68. And I said, oh, okay, well, you can see them from many hikes in the National Monument. And you can go up there and you can hike that land, and it's a perfect view of what you'll see. It's like beautiful oak woodland and rolling hills. It's gorgeous right now. It's just beautiful. And that's not going to look that way anymore. And that's something that they need to assess. And so we submitted a second comment letter, a simple one. That one's short. That one's easy to read. It's only 3 pages. That just says, hey, they use, like for instance, they call it the BLM land. They don't call it National Monument, so that's a problem. They also used points like from Creekside Trailhead. And they said, oh, no one can see it from Creekside. No one uses these trails over here, so we're good. And I mean, anyway, it's a problem. So they need to do a whole nother viewshed impact study. And this I just wanted to put in there. I'm not talking about this at all today, but I just wanted to show a picture because, again, it's important. It's something else that we're focused on. This yellow outline will be, Monterey Downs, and I included this under Fort Ord because it is part of Fort Ord. I mean, this is a major trailway access to the Fort Ord National Monument that will be totally cut off by Monterey Downs, and so it's definitely a project that we're going to review the EIR. I think the EIR is going to be out soon, and LandWatch is going to hold a CEQA workshop, a California Environmental Quality Act workshop, which will teach the public how to look at an EIR, what to look for as problems. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So if you get our emails, definitely look for that. It'll be fun because we always make that stuff fun. It can be kind of wonky, but we make it fun. So I'm going to end here, but I'm going to say I also brought these pamphlets for LandWatch, and inside, if you want to receive our emails or if you want to be on our mailing list, there's this card in here. You can either hand it right back to me or, mail it to me. It's already addressed. But I have plenty of these here, so I'm just going to leave them up front, and you can grab one. And we never share your information. We never share your email address. You can also go on our website, and we just ask for your name and email, and we never share it. We're very, very serious about keeping your information private. So if you want more information, here are these, and I'll put them right up front. So yeah, any questions?
First, I want to thank Amy. I think Amy and I are the two people who think that having a CEQA workshop would be lots of fun. Anyway, and I just want to say we are so fortunate at LandWatch to have Amy as our executive director. She has so much enthusiasm and knowledge, and so that's just my statement before we open it up to questions.
Oh, and these are my dogs at Fort Ord. Sorry, you can shut the computer. They were posing for me.
Bill.
To show how ridiculous all this proposed development is, I encourage you to have a map that shows Farini Ranch and all the development on Fort Ord. That includes not just Monterey Downs, but it includes the East Side Road, it includes the East Garrison business development and some of the other stuff. And you begin to see how ridiculous this looks. We are headed towards San Jose, I'm afraid.
Yeah, if we're not careful, for sure. And I thought about doing that, but I know that the folks today really wanted to hear about Farini Ranch. So, yes. Oh, sorry, excuse me.
I'd just like to add a couple of comments. It'd be nice to have a map that shows all these approved projects, so we know where they are.
Sure.
As well as, LandWatch does such a good job at that sort of thing, you could add. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is that these projects are using, as part of their project, public facilities. Mm-hmm. And we own those facilities. And that's our, that's our land that's being used. And it needs to be emphasized that this isn't just somebody coming and putting in something and, oh yeah, they can use the road and they can use some water. It's ours. And we need to make that clear that it belongs to the citizens of this county that they are using for their project.
Right. Tim brings up a really good point. One way that I may have diverged a little bit from other executive directors, and maybe it's because I'm from the South, I don't know, but I'm a pretty strong fiscal conservative personally. And one of the things that really bothers me, and I often find that it works when I'm talking to conservative people, and not like traditional Teddy Roosevelt conservatives, because they were like right on par. Like if you didn't have the water to build it, don't build it. Like if you don't have the money to do it, don't do it. But you know, sort of new conservatives, is I can always connect with them because I say these projects could cost you as a taxpayer money. You know, and that to me is really problematic. Like, how can we as a community help a private developer make a lot of money? And that's just not fair to the taxpayer. And that's maybe a little off from your point. And one more thing to Tim's point, in the case of Monterey Downs, that absolutely is public land. That's public land. You know, that should be a community decision, which is why LandWatch supported Measure M, because we felt like the community should vote on whether or not that land should remain as recreation or open space. In the case of Farini Ranch, you know, that's not public land, that's private land. So that there's definitely, you know, that there's differences there. But, you know, Tim brings up a really good point that, you know, I gave a speech to CSUMB, and Renee Mendez, the city manager of Gonzales, was there. And I was talking about how houses don't pay for themselves. They don't pay, a house does not pay for itself. It doesn't pay for the roads and the sewer lines and the water lines and the traffic light that has to get put in and the schools. It doesn't pay for itself with the tax revenue that's generated. And we were talking about the growth in the Gonzales area. And the city manager looked out at the crowd of 100 people and said, yeah, she's right, they don't. You know, they don't. They don't. I'm a city manager, I see it. Houses don't pay for themselves. So then who pays for it? Taxpayers. And that's a problem.
Kamei?
Could you address whether there are any commercial properties going in on Farini Ranch, and whether there are any affordable housing going in Farini Ranch, and where they would be?
Sure. So there's not commercial. There's not commercial proposed with Farini Ranch. There's a commercial development that was approved separate from Farini Ranch on the corner of Crowdy Tierra and Highway 68 that is still involved in litigation with the Highway 68 Coalition. Affordable housing. So the developer is proposing affordable housing. The problem, as we saw it in the EIR, and it's been a while, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that the developer identified the area, and it's, you know where Toro Regional Park is, and you know where those few houses along that road, it's kind of behind there. It would be, so like I said earlier, there's a west side of Farini Ranch property, and then there's an east side. Farini Ranch actually straddles Toro Regional Park. I didn't show you a map of the east side because that's where a lot of ag easements are going to go. That, you know, they're saying, oh, we're going to put all this acreage in an ag easement if you let us develop these hundreds of other acres. So I didn't show you that west side because there's not a lot of houses there, but east side, but that is where the affordable housing would go. And one of the things that LandWatch brought up in our comment letter is we said you didn't identify where the houses exactly were going to go. You didn't identify lot lines. You didn't say enough about it. So we really think the application is incomplete, that it's not a complete application because it doesn't clearly identify where those houses are going to be, but that's the area, like where the gate of Toro Regional Park is, those houses to the east of there. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I have maps of the east side with me, and I can show them to you.
So that road, the second road that you said was going to have a traffic light, is that on the other side of Toro Park or not?
What do you mean the other side of Toro Park? Well, Toro Park neighborhood or the regional park?
No, the regional park.
Here is where the traffic light would be. And this green right here is Toro Regional Park. So it would be on the west side of Toro Regional Park.
Other questions? Yes.
Has anyone thought to ask if in fact this goes in, how close it is to Laguna Seca and Monterey Airport? Both of those facilities regularly produce some kind of noise, some kind of pollution, if they're not into either airplanes or cars, and especially if you're concerned about the environmental impact. Noise is an environmental impact.
That's right.
Is there a way to put a caveat in there that requires anybody that thinks about buying to be told before they get there, there's going to be noise. If you don't like it, don't buy it.
You know, that's a good point. I think that it's pretty close, but I would think that it's far enough away. I didn't look at the noise section in the EIR, but I mean, it's a good point. And so the one thing I failed to say, and excuse me for this, the EIR is being recirculated, meaning it wasn't good enough, and I think that was partly because of our, very intense 50, 60-page comment letter. And so when it's recirculated, I'm going to look. I mean, that's a really good point. I'm going to look in the noise section because, again, because it's being recirculated, we essentially have sort of another bite at the apple, another, time for the public to comment and look at what they're saying are going to be the potential impacts.
This seems to me to be a tipping point where 68, I used to work in Salinas 30 years ago, and there wasn't a single traffic light from Monterey to Salinas.
I've heard that before. Oh, the days.
Well, but anyway, this is a tipping point, and 68 corridor, I'm still amazed when I get on the road between 3:30 and 4:30 what I'm caught in. What would the cost be to widen 68 to 4 lanes into Monterey?
Well, was that even assessed in the MTP? She's our traffic guru.
First, it would be very difficult to widen 68 because there are a lot of riparian corridors along 68. There have been discussions of maybe bus rapid transit with 1 lane for buses going either way, but they have planned and talked about 4 lanes through San Venancio, but you still have huge problems. Just to give you a sense of where we are financially in Monterey County, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan outlines projects for the next, by 2035, and it has a list of I think it's like $5 billion worth of projects. Out of that, there's only $635 million that are actually programmed and have funds for. Talking about new projects, highway projects, is so problematic in Monterey County that it just doesn't seem like a realistic option.
Yeah, I was recently at a Board of Supervisors hearing where they were getting an update from Public Works, essentially. And there's 1,200 miles of county roads in Monterey County. And, watching this presentation, how many are in really bad shape, and there's just no money to fix them. Jason Burnett, a friend, said to me, Carmel is 1 square mile, and we are millions in the rears for fixing those roads. And Monterey County, as Janet pointed out, hundreds of millions of dollars would be needed just to get them up to standard. And so when there's talk about building new roads or widening Highway 68, it's like, we can't even pay for what we have. And that was a big problem I had in Gonzales. They're planning this big expansion. And if any of you have ever been to Gonzales, I live on Alta and 5th, you pull into that town and there are potholes the size of China, and there's like my car. I have a new car and I've had to get it aligned so many times because the roads are so bad. And here Gonzales is talking about building more. And I said to the city manager, you can't even pay for what you have. And so to sort of get at your point, a tipping point, I think that tipping point has actually already been reached because they've identified, I'm sorry, let me say one more thing. Many projects like the Corral DTR Shopping Center used widening of Highway 68 as a mitigation. Like, oh, Highway 68 will be widened, so we'll be fine. And it's like, well, it's not even planned for, and there's no money for it. So
what's happening, and people don't realize what is happening to our community, to Monterey County, is when this is proposed, the effects are not cumulative, they are exponential. I just can't emphasize that enough. The effect is exponential.
That's a good point.
The cost will be exponential, if at all addressed. I would say right now the developer expects the community to pick up all the costs to make this work. And I will say right now, just personally looking at it, this will not work with the rest of the community taken into account.
Spoken like a true LandWatch member.
The gentleman.
Thank you to the league for hosting today's forum. It's
great, and thank you, Amy, for being here.
You're welcome, Billy.
And I grew up in Coral Park, so I know a lot about it. I've just taken the approach of leave a half hour earlier. It seems to be fine. I commuted in the Bay Area for a long time, so. I heard something in your presentation that seemed practical to me, which is, you have a lot of, there's all these approved projects already that haven't been built. And I don't know where this Farini Ranch fact sheet came from. I'm assuming since they have a website on it, maybe, I don't know who put it together. But this has been in the works for a long time. And I know one of the families involved built the Coral Park area, which I lived in for a long time. It's a great little community. It seems to me like they've done a lot of work to reduce the footprint and take into account a lot of the concerns from the community, probably from groups like LandWatch as well. It seems to me like this is a group that's ready to build and made a lot of concessions. So how do you feel about that, the concessions that have been made to reduce the footprint? And is it possible that anything can be built on this land? It sounds again like you have somebody who has the money, which I think is the most important part of building these things. It's easy to say build it, but there's a lot of money being spent to build it, and of course with the intent of making some money as well. So I'm just curious when you think about that, about the work that has been done, or at least it's been documented.
Sure. I mean, I'm 33 years old. I've been with LandWatch since 2008, actually 2008, not 2009, as Bev said. I don't know the past iterations, and it doesn't really matter to me. What I know about is the plan that's being proposed. The plan that's on the table and what's being proposed is what I know. If they had plans in the past, I don't know why that didn't happen, why those weren't built. I don't know. LandWatch doesn't know the answer to that. A developer would have to answer that question, and I'm not suggesting that he answer that question in this forum. But all I know about is what's on the table, and that's what we're dealing with. And, things have changed a lot since the 70s. And the neat thing is about Monterey County, and I've seen it even in my 6 years at LandWatch, there now seems to be an acknowledgement that we have constraints, that there are resource constraints, there are road constraints, there are constraints, there are budgetary constraints. And so maybe he should have gotten it done before we had that realization that there are constraints, but he didn't. And so what's on the table now in this environment of serious constraints, that's what's on the table, and that's what we have to deal with.
Once again, Amy, thank you so much for a very thorough and comprehensive presentation.